Okay, so last week I was a little bit this past week I was asked maybe to do a little bit of a sikkim of what we've been talking about the past few weeks, and that's the plan. So what I want to do this morning, I think B'ez Hashem, this will be the last of the sort of mini series about Shavavim. It's the last week of Shavavim. So what we'll do this morning is for a few minutes just to be misakim, just to sort of review a little bit some of the ideas that we've been sort of building up the past 2 weeks, and then the rest of the time, it shouldn't be that long. We'll be able to then add one last nakuda to it to sort of round it out a little bit. Okay, so again, the Kitzur Nimrod. What we've been discussing is that the tachlis of Klal Yisrael, and the tachlis of every single yid, is, so to speak, to stand by Har Sinai, to be able to hear Anochi Hashem Elokecha, to be able to feel the Achdas Hapshuta, to experience the oneness of the Rebbeinu Shalom, which we saw from the Zohar Kodesh and the Vilna Gaon. That's the letter Aleph. That's the letter Aleph. It starts with Anochi Hashem Elokecha, Echad, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. The Medrash said that's how Hashem Yisbarach introduced Har Sinai by saying Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. But the problem was, as we saw, is that in order for us to experience Hashem Echad, like we say Friday night, if we want to experience Echad, then we have to be Berazad Echad. Then we have to be at least Akopanim in the category of Echad. And the Rebbeinu Shalom created each and every one of us, not with an Aleph, but with a Beis. With a Beis. With a Tzad Zachar and a Tzad Nekeva. Or as Chazal put it, a sun and a moon. Really what's supposed to be is Shnei Mar Sagdayim. The Tzad Zachar, Tzad Nekeva, the sun and the moon of who we are, is supposed to be mamish, the same height, the same thing. The light of the sun completely reverberating and being expressed through the moon. Shnei Mar Sagdayim, Shnei Mishtamshim Bekeser Echad. And when they're both in that place of oneness, then the Aleph, the Keser Echad, the Aleph of Anochi, is able to reverberate through the world. And so we saw, and we explained, that the entire inyan of Golus Mitzrayim with Yitzias Mitzrayim is in order to work out this inyan. In order to work out this inyan, that instead of the moon being diminished and being thrown down to a low place, the whole process of Golus Mitzrayim is to sort of rehabilitate the moon and to return the moon to its original stature, in which it's able to really reflect all the light of the sun. And we explained that in order for this to happen, there's a number of stages. It's not right away from a state of lowness, where the moon is mamish disconnected and thrown to the ground, so to speak, and then right away, Shnei Mar Sagdayim, there's a middle madrega, there's a step in between, which is where the moon starts off, disassociated from the sun, very, very deficient, very small. But then the process is, again, we don't see this physically, but then the process spiritually is the moon is raised up to receive from the sun, but it's not the full size of the sun. It's not the same size of the sun, and all the light of the sun is not able to be reflected through the moon. A little bit. Al Kopanim, it's acting as a reflector of the sun, but it's not able to reflect all the light of the sun. And then finally, you get to the highest madrig of Shnei Mar Sagdayim, where all of the light of the sun is able to be reflected through the moon. That's the process. And the same thing it is with again, we have to define these terms, which we've been doing. So too it is with our Zachar and our Nekeva inside of each and every one of us. The Nekeva side of who we are starts off as disregard, very small, very deficient, very not at all on the same page as the Zachar. And then it moves to a higher Madrega where it is on the same page as the Zachar, but it's smaller than the Zachar. And it's not able to really reflect and to express everything that the Zachar part of who we are, has to say. And then eventually you get to the highest Madrega where it's Taka Shnei Mar Sagdayim, where the Nekeva of who we are is the same size and a perfect shidduch to the Zachar of who we are, and it's reflecting perfectly everything the Zachar has to say. So this is sort of the process of the sun and the moon, the Zachar and Nekeva of who we are. So we explained that, what does this mean practically? How to translate this? So we explained that the way to, there's a number of ways how to go about translating this in Avodas Hashem, but the path that we've been taking is that the Zachar and the Nekeva of who we are, or the sun and the moon of who we are, and all the steps along the way to return the Zachar and the Nekeva, or the sun and the moon, to Shnei Mar Sagdayim, to be mamish one, in order to allow the Aleph of Anochi to come to the world. The Zachar and the Nekeva, or the sun and the moon, is an inyan of Koil and Dibur. Koil and Dibur, your voice and your articulation. The Zachar of who you are means your Koil, and the Nekeva of who you are means your Dibur. And so we explained that the ultimate tachlis, the ultimate height. What does it mean? Kol? Kol means who you are, your voice, your heart. That's where voice comes from. It's from the lungs, the chest. That's where your heart is. That's not just the truth, but it's who you are. It's your lave, it's your heart, that's your kol. And your dibur means how you express yourself outwardly, how you talk to other people, passion, how you speak, how you communicate. And so the situation of Golus, where there's a complete disconnect, where kol is over here, the sun is over here, and the moon is completely diminished, is reflective of a state of where a person the words that he says is not reflective of who they are. To the highest degree, it means a person's lying, a person's saying things that are not true, a person's saying words to disconnect from one person to another. Everything he says is not yotzim min halev. It's not coming from the heart. It's not an expression of the kol of who you are. The guy said, what do you have for breakfast? You actually had pancakes. And the guy says, I had eggs. Why do you just lie? There's no reason for it. There's such a thing that a person is just in such a state of galus where the zachar is over here and then a cave is completely in disarray. All the diburim that are used, that are expressed, they're not coming from kol. They're not coming from that place of the truth. And so that's galus. That's galus. And we explained that this is why galus Mitzrayim is all revolving around Lashon Hara. Yosef Tzaddik, and his madrega, the Lashon Hara against the brothers, and Moshe Rabbeinu says, Achei noida davers, because of Lashon Hara. Lashon Hara is a perfect example of words that are disconnected from kol. Because we have a principle. If words are an expression of your heart, if it's dvarm hayotzim min halev, then it's nichnasim min halev, and it creates a bond between you and the person you're speaking to. Lashon Hara, which is about creating a rift between two people, it means automatically that the words are not yotzim min halev. Because if they'll be yotzim min halev, they'll be nichnasim min halev, and the hearts will be connected to each other. If the words are being used as a way of driving a wedge between hearts, then clearly the hearts of the speaker and the hearts of the listener are completely disengaged. And this is just diburim going back and forth. It's not dvar hayotzim min halev nichnasim min halev. So that's galus. That's galus. The ideal is the highest madrega, where the sun and the moon, the same page, zachar and nekev, the same page, or every single aspect of one's kol is being expressed in one's dibur. That's called standing by our Sinai, hearing Anochi Hashem Elokecha. That's Moshe Rabbeinu. That's what we saw. The Moshe Rabbeinu, what was unique to Moshe Rabbeinu is that, Tzaddik said this, that every word of Moshe Rabbeinu was an expression of his entire essence. Everything of Moshe is Dvarim Hayotzim and Alev Nechnasim Alev Moshe Rabbeinu, and everything that Moshe said was an exact expression of everything that's going on in his neshama at that moment, and that's why Torah Moshe is unbelievable, because each and every one of us, we can learn Torah, we can say Torah thoughts, but it might not be the ultimate expression of the deepest part of who we are. The deepest part of who we are is God Himself. And so Moshe Rabbeinu, who is able to express the deepest part of who he is in his dibur, that his dibur is his moon is a perfect reflector of his sun, then what comes out of that is Mamash Dvar Hashem, without any coding, without any constriction, is just straight. That's the highest level, and that's ultimately what we're all waiting for with Mashiach, of where the pasuk says, Kulam Yedu, I see that every Yid will just be able to have that experience of Moshe Rabbeinu with an absolute transparent lens, where everything that's in your kol is being expressed outwardly, straightforward, no sheker for sure, no lashon hara for sure, a complete awareness of who you are and the ability to express that and to connect who you are in the deepest of senses to everyone that you engage with. A bond between heart and heart, to the point of where it's literally Ki'ish Echad B'Lev Echad. That's what Har Sinai was, right? Ki'ish Echad B'Lev Echad. And that's because everyone at that moment was holding by that place of Shnei Maras HaGedolim, of Moshe Rabbeinu, where everything in their heart was being expressed outward. So their entire heart was being expressed, connecting itself to the entirety of someone else's heart. There was a complete bond. That's the ideal. The reality, though, is, as we saw from the Vilna Gaon explained, that until Mashiach comes, that's not possible. Until Mashiach comes, that's ultimately not possible for us to be like a Moshe Rabbeinu, where all of our kol is being expressed through our dibur. What we can strive for is the middle madriga, like I mentioned before, where the moon is reflecting the sun, although it can't reflect all of the sun. And so this is, like I mentioned, like the first mitzvah of Klal Yisrael that we were given, before our sin is Kiddush Levana. Right, Kiddush HaChodesh, right? Kiddush HaChodesh means that the moon is not full, right? If anything, by the beginning of the month, it's only a small sliver. Mekudesh. But at least the Jewish people are identifying and recognizing that it might be true that we're not able to express our full range of emotions and our full range of intellectual ideas. We can't. All of our kol is not able to be expressed in our words. Our words automatically are smaller than our heart. But nevertheless, there is a way that, and this is what we spoke about last time, that there is a way there is a process to sort of navigate that madrega of where the moon is not as big as the sun, but al kaponim it is reflecting the sun. And this is what we spoke about last week, where there is such a thing that despite the fact you can't express all of your koil, and you therefore have no choice but to sort of cut out certain aspects of the ideas that you want to share, or certain aspects of your feelings and emotions that you want to share. And that's the reality of life. We're unable to express everything, and people are unable to hear and to receive everything. That's just the nature of reality right now. What we saw last week is that there is nevertheless an ability to pinpoint and to specifically choose the words that you do say in such a way where, although they're not expressing in clear, articulated speech everything that you're feeling, but they can contain within them the essence of what you're feeling. And this is what we spoke about, that's how Torah Shebechsav versus Torah Sheba'al Peh works. Torah Shebechsav is the koil, it's the voice, it's what the Rebbeinu Shalom is feeling and thinking in his heart. And Torah Sheba'al Peh, so to speak, is the dibur, that's the words that the Rebbeinu Shalom actually says. And very often, and because of, until Mashiach comes, the sun and the moon are not the same size, so therefore Torah Sheba'al Peh cannot articulate everything Torah Shebechsav is thinking about. So Torah Shebechsav, like we said last week, is thinking about Klal Yisrael, it's thinking about Eretz Yisrael, it's thinking about Amunah, it's thinking about Geula. That's what Torah Shebechsav is thinking about, right? The Nevi'im in Tanakh they're not focusing on Klal Yisrael not shaking Luv and Ezek properly. They're talking about big inyanim of justice and mishpat and humanity and Klal Yisrael and Geula. And Torah Sheba'al Peh is coming from that koil, and Torah Sheba'al is talking about how to shake Luv and Esrog. And so there's like this huge disconnect. And that comes because the moon is simply not as big as the sun. But the chiddush but the avoid of that middle madreg is to realize that it's true that the dibur, the moon, is not reflecting all of the light in an open, revealed way. But whatever light is being reflected in the moon, whatever words are being said and communicated through Torah Sheba'al Peh, those words can be seen as a concentrated essence of everything the sun is talking about. So despite the fact that Torah Sheba'al Peh, so to speak, is not talking about always Geula and Amunah, these big ideas, it can't communicate that properly. The sun of Torah Shebechsav is too big for that moon. But nevertheless, the words that are being communicated in Torah Sheba'al Peh are sort of like a laser beam. It's the concentrated essence of everything that is in the sun, focused in those words. And we saw this from Rav Kook, that therefore when a person, practically speaking, what that means is that when you learn Torah Sheba'al Peh, you're learning about Shek Luv and Esrog, you have to believe that although the words that are being spoken to in the Gemara, right, or in the Mishnah Berurah, whatever it is, are talking about Shek Luv and Esrog, but you have to believe and you have to know, and you have to try to think about this, that what's trying to be said over in these words, and what's fueling these words, what's really being said in this conversation is Amunah, Geula, Am Yisrael, Eretz Yisrael. All the Torah Shebechsav, the Kinyanim, it's just it can't. Torah has a hard time communicating it and articulating it. So it's talking about pratim. But in the pratim, what's really being said is big ideas. And that's what's trying to be communicated. And Rav Kook said, and we saw this, that when a person engages in the conversation of Torah, when you listen to the articulation of Torah Sheba'al Peh, realizing and knowing that it's really a much bigger conversation that's being expressed, that's being talked about. Just you don't hear it in those, but it just can't be articulated properly. Then all of a sudden, when you learn about Sheikh Luv and Esrog, all of a sudden you become a bigger person. You become a bigger mammon. You become a bigger lover of Eretz Yisrael, a person that desires Mashiach more. And you think, like, where'd that come from? Like, I'm not learning about Mashiach. I'm not learning about Amun. I'm learning about Luv and Esrog. Yeah. Well, those are the words. But the light that's being reflected by that moon, well, it's a small moon, so it's not saying everything. But whatever the moon is, it is reflecting all the light of the sun in that small little beam. Again, like the example we gave is like a laser beam, where it's not like when you have something that's a piece of something else, there's always two ways to think of it. Either you have a huge body of water, and now you're only able to take 1 gallon of it. So that's a piece of it. The 1 gallon that you take out of the lake, it's not all of the lake in the 1 gallon. It's 1 gallon of the lake. But with a laser beam, it's not like that, right? What's a laser beam? You have a huge, room full of light, whatever it is, and you have a mechanism to constrict all of that light into one focus point. So although at the outside you might think, okay, it's just one laser beam, it's just one point of light. No, but that one point of light contains within it the entirety of the light that preceded it. So that's the way to think about the moon. The moon doesn't have to just be a piece of the sun. It doesn't. The words that we say don't have to be just a piece of who we are or a side of who we are, an aspect. We can choose our words in such a way that they could express everything we're feeling, although we can't articulate it. And that's what Torah Sheba'al Peh was. Now we gave another example of this in more, down-to-earth terms about how to do that. How do you communicate? How do you pick and choose your words in such a way where the words themselves are able to be heard by the listener, and the listener picks up on the fact that there's more here than just the words, right? Because that's what you want, right? You want if you're trying to put your heart and soul into a specific conversation, so you can't put all your heart and soul. You can't express all your heart and soul. Your sun and the moon is not the same size. Mashiach isn't here yet. So you have to pick and choose the conversation, whatever the point is. But how do you get the point across? How do you subtly hint or make it clear that the words that are being articulated, there's more to it than what you're hearing. And the listener then picks up on that and begins to realize, I'm going to pay closer attention to this. Not just closer attention to the words and the intellectuals, but to try to receive what's being spoken to me. So we saw from the Rambam, and this is what we find in Torah as well, is that the way to communicate that is to incorporate silence, shtika, silence, into one's speaking. When a person's talking, straight, without a pause, without any break, without any moment to allow the listener to focus. But it's more than just that. It's when you fold in silence with the words, then that redefines the words as a vehicle for something bigger. When it's just spoken, then all that's heard is just a spoken word. But when there's silence involved, then all of a sudden the speaker, the listener, is able to pick up on the nuance that there's something more to these words than are just being articulated. And all of a sudden now a bond can be made between the listener and the speaker, because the listener is beginning to realize that the speaker is giving himself over in these words. It's not just about these words themselves. There's something else being given over here. There's a big sun that's being expressed over here. And this is what we find in Torah. We find in Torah as well that, for example, in Gemara we find this all the time, and in Chumash all the time, where there's a lot of pauses. Like, for example, in Chumash, there's stumas and psuchas, there's parshias. Like, why do you need that for? Just go. No. And even within parshias, there's always introductory. Vaydaber shel Moshe Leimer. Vaydaber shel Moshe Leimer. Okay, get to the point. Just tell us about tzitzis. Tell us about Shabbat. Vaydaber shel Moshe Leimer. So Rabbi Nachman said that the inyan of those pauses and those like introductory statements is Hashem Yisparach telling the Klal Yisrael, listen. What do you mean listen? We're opening the Chumash. Obviously, we're trying to. No. Listen. In other words, the words that are being said over here are more than meets the eye. Allow the words to be a vehicle to bring all the light of the sun into your life without me having to say, because I can't say everything right now, but to be able to articulate that. So that's what we spoke about. Now, one last nakuda that I think needs to be addressed over here is the following idea. Like, sort of until now, the one that's been between our Zachar and Nekeva, between our sun and the moon, the one that's been in disarray, that needs real rehabilitation, has been the moon. The moon has been lowered and small, and and there's even when it does become big and it does try to communicate the truth of the sun, it's not big enough to communicate everything. It's always the moon's fault. It's the moon's fault. What we're going to see today a little bit is that it's not entirely true. There also perhaps one of the biggest issues is not so much on the sun, but it's not so much on the moon, but it's on the sun. Now let me explain. If you remember, I think it was last time, we mentioned the Vilna Gaon. The Vilna Gaon said based on a famous Chazal. The Chazal say that when the Rebbeinu Shalom created the world, he created a male Leviathan and a female Leviathan. And the Rebbeinu Shalom saw that if they were to be together and to have children, to have offspring, the world couldn't tolerate that. So what did the Rebbeinu Shalom do? The Rebbeinu Shalom killed the Nekeva and was Mesares the Zachar. So and the Vilna Gaon said, without getting into the details why fish and what's going on over there, but the Vilna Gaon said that story of the Rebbeinu Shalom not allowing the male and female Leviathan to be together on the same page, that's the story of the sun and the moon. That's everything we're talking about. The inability of the coil of who we are to fully express itself in the diburim of who we are, that disconnect, that's the story of the male and female Leviathan being in disarray. And the death of the Nekeva means the sun being lowered down. It means a person speaking and it's not reverberating with your truth, with the essence, with the color of who we are. Fine. But paying close attention to that Chazal, the Rebbeinu Shalom didn't just kill the Nekeva. The Rebbeinu Shalom was Mesaris the Zachar, which is a funny thing because once the Nekeva is dead, because, you don't have to worry about procreation anymore. The Nekeva is dead. So Chazal say such a thing, that he didn't just kill the Nekeva, he was Mesaris the Zachar. And the meaning of this is that this is one of the what we're going to investigate this now for a few minutes, the positive side of it and the negative side of it and how to navigate it. But there is a phenomenon that I'm painting a picture as if a person has this full array of emotions and this full array of intellectual ideas and has this big coil, but he just can't articulate it. So sometimes he can't articulate anything. That's called when the moon is mamish diminished. And sometimes you could communicate something, but it's not the full scope of everything you're feeling. That's called the moon being built back up, but not the same size as the sun. But there is a phenomenon of what's called timtum halev. Right? There is such a phenomenon. That's probably like the elephant in the room. Most people are not so emotionally and intellectually self-aware. So we're talking about someone who is has this big coil, this big heart, and just now we're trying to figure ways to communicate it. And the problem is the moon. But sometimes the problem is the sun. Sometimes the problem person doesn't find within themselves a coil. Like he asks the guy, who are you? And they're like, I don't understand what you're talking. I don't understand the question. There is such a thing where a person is so closed off. Everyone has a heart, right? Everyone has a coil. But you might not. But the heart that a person has, the coil that a person has, might be so locked up that it's not even conscious to them. And so not only do we have a problem sometimes with our moons, sometimes the moon is not an issue. Sometimes a person with the proper training and skills, you'll be able to communicate. But sometimes the real problem is that your sun is completely, there's clouds over your sun. The sun is not communicating. This is what's called by the Svar, by Tanakh, it's called a leiv even, a heart of stone. So it's a funny thing, a heart of stone. If it's made of stone, it's not a heart, right? It's not like, a heart by its very definition is a muscle, it's flesh. So what does it mean, a leiv even? The answer is a stone. A heart of stone doesn't mean that it's just a rock. If it's just a rock, it's not a heart. The answer is, of course, it's a heart, but it's covered over by even, and it's not able to express itself. Ad kedei kach that the person that has such a heart might not even know that they have a heart, but of course they have a heart. So there is such a thing as a leiv even, and that's what it means when Chazal say that Hashem was Mesaris the Zachar. The series of the Zachar means that he has he has all the kaiches of his Zachar, but he can't express it. Not only because there's no Nekeva, but within himself there's something holding him back. That's called the leiv even. The coming of Mashiach is not only the rehabilitation of the moon. The moon comes back to its full stature. And Mashiach has the Kaich HaDibur. Mashiach is the same letters, Rabbi Nachman's pointed this out, that Mashiach is the same letters as Mesiach, the one that's able to communicate. It says in Pasuk regarding Mashiach, He ke'eret v'shevet piv. He'll conquer the whole world with the words of his mouth. The shevet, with the scepter of his mouth. So Mashiach means certainly the rehabilitation of the moon, that we're able to communicate properly, and the moon will be big enough to communicate everything. But more than that, part of Mashiach is, as the Pasuk says, V'hasi roisi leiv even mikrebecha, that Hashem is going to remove the stone heart from amongst us. Because you can have all the ability to articulate, but if you don't have an inner sense of who you are and your emotions and your thoughts, if there's no, if your heart is unable to communicate even within itself, you could have all the moons in the world. The sun is being blocked, and so Mashiach has to do both things. So the Nekeva has to be brought back to life, and the Zachar has to has to have the surgery undone, and the serous has to be taken away. So let me show a little bit of this, where this is coming from. If you take a look at Marmukah number 1, this is a Medrash Rabbah. It's a Medrash Rabbah. It's in Bereshis, Perek Zayin, Pasuk Piece Aleph. So this is talking about it's a difficult pasuk in Mishlei. This is a pasuk. You'll read the pasuk together, and we'll see the Medrash applies this pasuk to the story of Yosef and Yehuda, the story of the brothers. You'll see in a second. So it says like this: Ve'era, Hashem says, Shlomo Melech says, Ve'era be'pesoyim. Hashem says, I look down and I see foolish people. Avina bebanim nar, and I also see young children, chaser leiv, that are missing a heart. So Hashem is sort of looking at the world and he's a little bit disappointed, right? There's a lot of fools and people that don't have hearts. So what does that mean? So it says a message like this: Ve'er b'pesayim. Hashem says, I look down and I see foolish people. Zeh shvatim. That's the shvatim. Okay. Abina bebanim nar, and I also understand young children. Zeh Yosef. That's Yosef. Chasar leiv, who's called the one that doesn't have a heart. Yosef is called the one that doesn't have a heart. Why? Because he said lashon hara against his brothers. Hayesh chasar leiv Yosef mizeh. Is there anyone that's missing a heart more than that? Someone that says lashon hara. In other words, it's an amazing thing is that until this point, we've always said that lashon hara is a perfect example of this disconnect between kol and dibur, right? Where the whole point of kol and dibur in harmony, where you're zachar nekeva, is where it's storm hayotzim in alev, like Moshe Rabbeinu, right? Yotzim alev, nichnasim alev. So a heart to heart, they become one. It's a bond. Lashon hara means words that are said to disconnect hearts. So obviously, if the words that are being said are cutting hearts apart, they're not yotzim in alev and echnasim alev. They're not like that. So we've been describing until this point. So what is Gol Sadi? What is lashon hara? Lashon hara is I have a kol. My son is over here, but I'm not. The moon is not reflecting it. It's the moon's problem. But says the Medrash, no. It's not always the moon's problem. Sometimes lashon hara and Gol Sadibur comes because the guy's chasar leiv, because his heart is missing. In other words, we would say like Yisra Tzaddik is a strong statement by Yosef, but again, Lefi Madragasei. But for us, it means the Medrash is introducing us to this idea that it's not always the problem of articulation. Sometimes it's a problem that the person himself doesn't know of any deep, sophisticated ideas and emotions within himself. There's something blocking him from really going deeper within himself. And so this is what's called the Leiv Evan. Okay. Now this idea, this phenomenon of having Leiv Evan certainly gets a bad rap. It's not that the Hashem Mashiach comes, Hashem is going to take away the Leiv Evan. But I think it's important to realize and appreciate why the Rebbeinu Shalom made this phenomenon. Why is there this? What is the root of this concept of having a Leiv Evan, of being closed off and shut emotionally, intellectually from within yourself? Obviously, it's something that it comes with galus. It's like sort of the definition of galus within the soul is that your heart is a heart of stone. But where is that coming from? This has to be everything in the world, even if it's a negative thing, has to have some root in kedusha. So what's the positive root that this idn of Leiv Evan is coming from? And if we could identify the positive root, then maybe we'll be able to just focus, be yotzei archiv with the positive root of it, and then we won't have to have the side effects and the snowball effect of the actual Leiv Evan itself. You'll see what I mean. So take a look at Marmukah number 2. This is a piece from Likutei Amarim from Tzaddik HaKohen, page 118. So he says like this. It's a whole Torah over there, but this is just one piece of it. He's talking about what's the shot that the Torah was given in the desert, right? This is Parsha. The Torah was given in the desert. Why Dafka the desert? The desert is always a place that's inhospitable. It's not just inhospitable. You can't grow things. The land is not fertile. The land is not fertile. In other words, if the land would be considered like a heart, a midbar is a Leiv Evan. You understand? It's a Leiv Evan. It's rocky terrain. It's inhospitable. It's infertile. It's not a Leiv Basar. Very often in Tanakh we find this, that the difference between a Leiv Basar versus a Leiv Evan is that a Leiv Basar, is fertile ground. It's fertile ground. You're open. The heart is open, so it could hear new things. It could come up with new ideas, self-discovery. It finds within itself layers, deeper layers than it didn't know before. Like I was talking about on Shabbos, where the words of Torah are words of tenuah, of movement. And so when it hits the Leiv Basar begins to unravel, begins to unpackage itself. It finds more inyanim. A Leiv Evan, is like, it is what it is. It's not fertile ground. It's not discovering any more of itself. It's not receiving anything. It's stuck. Lev Evan. So the Torah was given in a midbar, in a place of Evan. Says it's like this: Midbar hu loy makom charishu uzriya. The midbar is not a place of growth, of planting and so on. It's infertile. V'chein haschalas uma Yisraelis b'midbar. And in fact, Klal Yisrael began in the desert. Right, that's where we became a people. Why? So says Tzaddik, because although a Lev Evan is not something you want at the end. In other words, Lev Evan is like in a shut, closed, completely. No depth, no subtlety, just a chamor, like just a grub person without any depth at all. That you don't want. But says our tzaddik, but to be a little bit closed and a little bit stubborn, that is an important thing. In other words, let's put it this way. I'll tell you outside, then we'll see it together inside. If a person is kulei basar, so that person is super into like self-discovery, right? That person is super into going on. Week-long retreats somewhere, with just him in nature, it's gewaldig. But that same quality of complete openness also makes you open to all sorts of mishagas, right? All sorts of mishagas. I don't just mean mishagas when he's looking for the right retreat. I'm talking about like, he be'etzem is a very, very open person. And so sometimes openness is a good thing when you're trying to find the truth and there's guidance, but what if the whole world is bombarding you with shtuyah, mamish, like shtusim and avolim, and even worse than just shtus? If you have a lev batzar, then everything comes in, everything comes out, and everything comes in. It's just an open door. That's very nice when you're not being bombarded by crazy things. But if you're being bombarded by crazy things, or you have to establish something that's rock solid in your life, then you need a little kshay oirif. You need to be a little bit stubborn about it. Now, stubbornness, when it's taken to an extreme, becomes a lev evan. But stubbornness be'etzem is a very, very important thing in the beginning of a person's journey. Before you're fully established as an Eved Hashem, before you're fully established with a certain understanding of truth and awareness, you're at a point of where you don't know anything. So then you're bombarded by the nations of the world, so to speak. So you have to have a little ksheirif. That's a good thing. And so Sesser is like this: Ki hascholas kol davar, the beginning of everything, tzarich achshas. It needs a certain stubbornness and a certain closed-mindedness, even a certain I know the truth, and the whole world can tell me I'm wrong, and I don't care. That's a stubbornness, but that's necessary. When you know the truth and the whole world is telling you you're crazy, then you need that stubbornness. Shalayazuz, that a person shouldn't move, yispata, and become seduced. Ki kol haschos kashas. See what he's saying? A nice, beautiful pshat. Kol haschos kashas means beginnings are always difficult. So no, kol haschos kashas. In the beginning, you have to be kosher. You have to be hard. The nikra kasha utroshin. You have to be hard. You have to be rocky. Lakach nikru az. That's why Klal Yisrael in the beginning we're in the midbar. And we're called Am Kshay Oiref, a stubborn people. Ki haschol v'hayisai tzarich is kasha v'chazak. A person has to be rock solid in the beginning. That I feel kol rucha sheba olam, that in all the winds of the world, ein mazizas, it's not going to move him. The kach ha'ovis, and that's why the ovis hakdaishim, shein yisai ha'uma, they are the beginning, the foundation of Klal Yisrael. They are called the rocky ones. Avram Avinu has a nickname in Tehillim. He's called Esan Hazrachi. Esan, what does Esan mean? Esan means the rocky one. Avram Avinu was the most stubborn person to ever live, because the whole world was telling him that he's the Apikaris, and Avram Avinu says, "No, you're all the Apikaris." So we think of it, from our perspective, Avram Avinu was the tzaddik, and everyone else was just barbarians running around, killing each other and doing all sorts of crazy things. No. There were papers of it. Avram Avinu was the Apikaris. Everyone else were the tzaddikim. They were Oivdei Elohim, and he was the Apikaris. And Avram Avinu had to say, "No, I know the truth, and all of you don't." That takes the kshay oirif, that takes a stubbornness. And that was necessary when it's you against the world. If Avram Avinu had a lev basar completely, then what would happen? He would be receptive to all the antagonism from the rest of the world, and he couldn't be Avram Avinu. The problem is that when after that rocky beginning, if you continue with the kshay oirif, then eventually you become this stubborn, rocky, rock solid, without any introspection, without any investigation, without any movement, without any ability to flourish and to grow new ideas. This is the way it was. This is the way it's going to be. No chedusha, nothing. That's a leiv evan. What we want is a leiv basar recognizing that there is a place for she'orev, there is a place for stubbornness, but not to allow it to become a leiv evan. So it says something like this. Okay. It's an amazing thing. Something says, in Mitzrayim, we're paru over a year, we increased the number a tremendous amount because Mitzrayim was not a place of kshir. Mitzrayim was a place of leiv basar. It was an ervas aretz. There was a lot of taivin, a lot of, it was not a place of Evan. It was a place of basar. That's for sure. But because of that, Klal Yisrael in Mitzrayim increased in number, because the nature of leiv basar is to develop, is to move, is to change, to always shift. But in the Midbar, when Klal Yisrael are establishing themselves as the Am HaNivchar, which demands rockiness and stubbornness, just like the Ovis, on an Ovis level, Klal Yisrael to do that on a nation level. So therefore, the numbers that we enter into the Midbar with are basically the same numbers as we enter Eretz Yisrael with, 600,000 give or take, same thing. Why was there no increase? What happened? The answer is because Klal Yisrael at that time were holding by a bechin, and they had to, a bechin of kshe'erev, a bechin of troshim, of rockiness. And that results in no growth. It results in stability. Everything stays the same, but there's no development either. This is why Ratzelik points out, by the Ovis HaKadoshim, for the most part, they had a hard time having children. Why? Because their inyan was to be asan, to be rock solid. That results in a lack of ability of developing, of moving, of changing. And it took Nisan in order for them to have children. So he goes on, it's just, 3 lines before the end. For David HaMelech al Vashalom but Mashiach, who mamish hahepach midas akshus. Mashiach is the opposite of that. By the time Mashiach comes, there's no opposition anymore. There's no world telling you, the world is not going to be telling you you're apikarsim. So the whole stubbornness was really only necessary because of the opposition of Golas. But once Golas ends, then the Klal Yisrael can be who we truly are, which are leiv basar. And that's what David HaMelech is. Who hamashlim hakoil, and David HaMelech Mashiach Tzidkeinu completes the whole system. B'havos leiv basar, with the return of a leiv basar, v'asaras leiv evan legamri, and the removal of the stone heart. U'masakin Adam Rishon, and David HaMelech Mashiach will ultimately fix Adam Rishon himself. Shu ascholas ha'olam, Adam Rishon also. The sin of Adam Rishon. This is a big Torah. We're not going to go into this now. But even the sin of Adam and Chava was also rooted in this decision to choose leiv evan over leiv basar. The Eitz Chayim means change, constantly things moving, things are changing, evolving. That's called leiv basar. Eitz Hadas Toivera, that means I know what I know, and that's pretty much it. It's a leiv evan. And Adam and Chava's decision to eat from the Eitz Hadas meant we're going to choose a leiv evan. And the truth is, it's not so crazy because they were the beginning of humanity, and the beginnings taka have to be rock solid. It's chaval because we could have skipped ahead quite some time if they just chose the Eitz Chaim. Okay, but Mashiach is going to fix that mistake by returning the world to mamish a leiv basar. And so he ends off the line of Kumay Mashiach ben David, Shisakin Kol Kula, and that's what Mashiach ben David is going to do to fix the whole world. And then the whole world will be able to communicate properly. Right? Safa, we'll be able to. What's a Safa Brura? Safa Brura doesn't mean just that everyone's speaking the same language. A clear tongue. A clear tongue, that all of your heart will be able to express in all of your words. But again, what's stopping us until now is both the moon being diminished. We don't have a complete language to articulate everything our koil has to say. It's a language barrier. And second of all, there might be a leiv evan blocking your koil from expressing itself, even within itself. But Mashiach comes and creates the Safa Brura. He gives us a full articulate language to express everything that the neshama has to say, and it also will remove a leiv evan to allow the neshama to communicate. So that's all very nice. That's when Mashiach comes. So is there anything we can do now in order to remove our leiv evan? With this subtle awareness that the root of the leiv evan is necessary. So the objective is not to become this open, sort of a hippie-minded, just openness, no, because that's not Klal Yisrael. That's not. Until Mashiach comes, you can't have that because there's too much craziness. It's not possible. So there has to be some balance of having a very firm sense of purpose and a very firm sense of mission, that you're sent here for a purpose to be mashpia and to move and to evolve as a person and as a people. But at the same time, to balance that with not becoming overtaken by the world that we're supposed to flourish in. This balance of again being open but closed at the same time. So it's hard to do that. So Baruch Hashem, the Rebbeinu Shalom did give us the tools to do this. And what tools did He give us? Basically, all of Yiddishkeit. And like I've said this many times, that very often everything we need is already what's mamish in front of our noses. We're already familiar with. It's just a matter of realizing the potential that's within it. It's like a person that's given a computer. So like that computer can have the kaiches to do all sorts of things. But when the person's young, or maybe Dafka, when the person's young, they might chop more what the computer can do than the older ones. We understand whatever. A person is not holding by the highest madrig of understanding what the computer is capable of. So all they think of it is it's like I was driving with the kids the other day, and they asked me if I could put on music like Marlo's Midos machine or something for my phone. So I said, no, it's only mommy's phone can do that. My phone is just a phone. So there's like, they couldn't understand. Like, wait a minute, your phones phones do that. It's like, no. A phone means just to be able to call someone. There's other inyanim that were somehow incorporated in the phone. Like only mommy's phone has that other stuff. I don't. Okay, so it's like it might not chop what's everything that's going on inside of it. So you're given something. It's just a phone, but really it's ain't safe what's going on in there. So Yiddishkeit's the same thing. Lahavdil. That we're mitzvahs themselves contain everything we need in order to be a healthy heart and a healthy kol and a healthy dibur. It's all entire, but it's a matter of just engaging in mitzvahs in such a way with the realization that mitzvahs have the ability to do this. So let me show you what I mean. Marmukah number 3. Let's go quickly. It's already late. Marmukah number 3. So this is in Divrei Seifrim from Rav Tzadok HaKohen also, page 31. First, he gives us a framework. He says like this: Iker Yadus Belev. It's an amazing line. Iker Yadus Belev. When we think of what are we doing with Torah mitzvahs? We think we're doing things, right? We're doing mitzvahs maisias, physical actions. So you would think if we're doing physical actions, the main objective of those physical actions is to fix something physical. Says there something? No. Iker Yadus. The main objective. What's the mission? What's the goal? What are you really trying to fix with all the mitzvahs that you do? Iker Yadus is belief. Really, what you're trying to correct and realign and to fix is your own heart, and finding this balance of having a leiv basar, but still having a kshei oirif to survive galus. That perfect balance of having a healthy heart and a healthy koil. Really, that's what Yiddishkeit is trying to do. But the Rebbeinu Shalom did an amazing thing: is that He gave us tangible physical activities, whose target ultimately is the heart. It says here tzaddik v'yira. So, for example, fear, yiras Hashem, shu ikar. It's a little bit of a mistake. Ikar asher Hashem shoyel mimach, which the pasuk says that's really what the Rebbeinu Shalom wants, is that we should become God-fearing Jews, right? Einu el b'leiv. That's not that's a heart. That's an experience of the heart. Yiras Hashem, avos Hashem. V'chein kol chayvus elvavis, right? All the duties of the heart are all, as the name indicates, the duties of the heart. Kikasher haleiv taiv, when you have a good heart, shumida hayishar shivar adam, which is the main thing that a person needs in life to be healthy and well, is a good heart. Then everything you do is going to be coming from that good heart. And the same thing is the opposite. If a person's heart's no good, either too open or too closed, then everything you do is going to be reflective of that stubbornness or that too much openness. Now, you just look at that piece. It's like, oh, Rav Tzadok is throwing away Sheikh Muvan Esrei, right? Because he's saying that the whole inyan of Torah mitzvahs is the heart. So what activities should we do to fix our heart? Say Tillim, you think, daven, things that are more heart oriented. But what about the vast majority of Avodas Hashem, which is Maisa oriented? So then those are not targeting the Iker. So there's another piece from Rav Tzadok in Tzidkas HaTzadik, piece Samaches, and over here Rav Tzadok explains, no, that Adarabah, the real objective of every mitzvah is what it does to the heart. But the Rebbeinu Shalom made it in such a way that in order to engage the heart, you need kalim. You need vessels in order to work out your own heart. And the kalim that we have to work out our own heart, to create within ourselves this perfect hybrid of an open heart, but closed at the same time for the right reasons, that's what Taryag mitzvahs are about. And so the point is to engage in Taryag mitzvahs and to shake Luv and Esrog and to learn, daven, do all the mitzvahs that we do, but to realize that, but to use them as targets and as utensil, as kalim, to get the heart to be a leiv basar. That every mitzvah that you do, to be literally Literally, that's nothing more, nothing less. To be conscious of the fact before you do a mitzvah that this somehow should bring me that much closer to having a leiv basar. You put on tefillin, somehow to bring you to a leiv basar. Tzitzis, leiv basar. Learning, leiv basar. Davening, leiv basar. And then all those mitzvahs are now being used as ways to get to accomplish the main thing, which is the leiv. Take a look again. Maramuk number 4, Tzidkas Tzadik Pi Samachas. Kol ha'avodah shebe'ivri haguf. All the avodah that we have using the limbs of the body. And the mitzvahs that involve the body. Heimrak liyasher halev. What therefore, not just other mitzvahs of the body are there to straighten the heart, to give a person a healthy heart, a leiv tov. Again, the same thing he said in the previous piece. The main thing is the heart. That's where the Rebbeinu Shalom dwells within a person, is in your heart. Like Chazal say, that Hashem is the heart of the Jewish people. The rock, not a leiv Evan, but the rock of all rocks, which is the Rebbeinu Shalom, is my heart. Therefore, says Rav Tzaddik, Lo yiyeh hamechavim min ha'adam, rakol el hadvarim hamavin el hamechavim. Therefore, says Rav Tzaddik, whatever you're doing in Yiddishkeit, realize what its goal is, what the purpose is, and direct the actions towards that purpose. So you do mitzvahs, of course, nothing's changing in your schedule, but it means do all the mitzvahs with the mentality, with the consciousness that these are all activities to straighten out my heart, that I should have a leiv basar, that I should be able to have a sense of a spiritual identity and knowledge and awareness, and then at the same time, like we spoke about last time, in the past few weeks, to figure out ways to sort of develop a language to articulate that. But to remove the leiv Evan, that's the objective of all of mitzvahs. And the Zohar says, Al Taryag mitzvahs, regarding the 613, that Taryag eaten, that these are 613 eitzes. They're a piece of advice. To what? To do what? The answer is to have a good heart. That's what their eitzes for. And now he says an amazing Torah. He says, based on this, we could explain something. It says in Pasuk with Eliyahu Navi, one of the most amazing psukim in Tanakh, which describes sort of the prophetic experience of Eliyahu Navi, is that first Eliyahu Navi says, first he saw there's a wind and a stormy fire and all sorts of noise. And then finally, after all of that, Kol Dmamadaka, a small, still voice. And that's where the prophetic experience came from. So it says something like this, and this is what it means that after the wind, there was a noise. Loi barash Hashem. But that's not where Hashem was in the noise. And after the noise, there was a fire. And again, Hashem was not in the fire. Where was Hashem? In the still voice. Ki kovid Hashem einem bedover nirgash umarish. Really, the objective of Yiddishkeit is not in the noisy part of it. You understand? Like the mitzvahs that we do, the physical side of our mitzvahs, that's the noisy part of Yiddishkeit. That's not really what the objective is. You need, as we'll see, you need that to get to the still voice. But really, the Iker Tachlis is a still voice that's beneath the surface of all those noisy actions. That's the leiv basar that we're trying to develop. But you can't find the Kol Dmamadaka unless you go through Rash and Ruach and Eish. You have to go through the noise in order to find the Kol Dmamadaka. But the Tachlis is the Kol Dmamadaka. So he says, Rak b'Kol Dmamadaka, in that still voice, V'alev. That's the heart that we're talking about. She'ena nirgash sh'shum that no one sees, no one can pick up on. Everyone can just see the maisim that you do. But they just see the Rash and they see the Ruach, but no one sees the Kol Dmamadaka. It's a personal within yourself. It's within yourself. The lamdu mizeh bebrachas. And take a look how Tzaddik teaches the Gemara. The Gemara says in Brachas, nun chesed mit alpha klal, l'malchusa da'ara. The Gemara says a klal that if you want to know how how the malchus of heaven works, look at the malchus of this world, and you'll be able to relate to it. So the Gemara says a maisa that that based on this pasuk of Rash and Ruach and so on, and eventually you get the Kol Dmamadaka. So Gemara says a maisa, you could see that in this world. How so? Because in this world, if the king is coming somewhere, so when does the king come? So the Gemara says first the parade comes and there's trumpets and a lot of noise. That's not when the king is. Only after all the trumpets pass and all that stuff, and then there's a hush in the crowd, then the king appears. So it's because that's the same thing. Hashem is not in the Rash, but the same thing. But the king is not just going to appear. It's not. There has to be a parade first. So with the parade first, then the king appears. But you're right. But the king is not in the parade. The king is in the silence that emerges after the parade. Now Rav Tzaddik says that's one Gemara in Brachas. Then our tzaddik, again, just filling in the blanks. Then our tzaddik brings us to a different Gemara, and the Gemara says a principle, Man Malki Rabbana. That who is the true king in this world? It's the Chachamim, the Talmidei Chachamim that are in control of themselves. In other words, putting this together, it means that in order to be a melech, in order to be a Talmid Chacham, in order to be a real tzaddik, you have to follow this model, which is, you need a parade. You need all the Rash in the world. But you have to know that that's not where the king really emerges. The king emerges in the cult of Mamadaka. And unless you can create in your life this dynamic of there being a noisy parade with a silence after that, then you're not a melech. And in order to have a melech, you need that matzav. You need the noise and a silence that emerges after it. In other words, you need a Yiddishkeit of maisim, but to recognize that the objective of all those actions is a still place within the self that's called fixing the heart. And that's what Yiddishkeit looks like. So he says like this, again, in the middle of the paragraph, Uman Malki Rabbanan. Who are the kings of the world? Really are the Rabbanan. Shem HaMaylichim Al Atzman, the ones that rule themselves, HaMaishim Al Yitzram, that control the Yetzirah, K'maysham B'Basra, like the Gemara says in B'Basra, that the kings are the Chachamim. So therefore, the same thing over here. In order to be a king, even with your own Yetzirah, Loi Barash Hashem, it doesn't come. Malchus is not really found in the noise of Yiddishkeit. The Malchus of Yiddishkeit is really found in the still voice that comes after the noise. But here's the point. Gunda kamai secholef, the parade does come first. So you can't have the still voice without the parade first. This is the process. You need the kalim, you need the utensils, you need the body to be engaged in Yiddishkeit in order for the heart to be penetrated. But the objective is the heart. Kika avsha, that makes a lot of noise. Ki lule zeh, if it's not for the first parade, yavsher, then the king is not appearing. Rak mikaydim tzarich liyas barash. First there has to be a noise. V'taikif negdai, and which means in one's avodas Hashem, mitzvahs ma'asiyas, and it means making noise against your Yetzirah, fighting it in a clear way. Like the Gemara says, oilam yarg is adam, that a person should make noise and yell and scream against the Yetzirah. It means that there has to be a parade. Yiddishkeit has to be. You have to be tired. You know, that's be physically draining. You know, but that's not really where the Malchus appears. That's not the Memshal Gemara. Rakashu Belirash. The real Malchus emerges after the noise settles down and all the dust settles, and your heart is a little bit softer. That's the Malchus. David HaMelech said, "Libi chol b'kirba," that my heart has been emptied out from within me. Chazal say that he killed his Yetzirah with fasting. So fasting is what. So if you saw David Melch, you just see him fasting. But David Melch is identifying. But all that fasting was in order to get somewhere, which is to have a good heart, and that's true with all of Yiddishkeit. Shuarash negative. So the fasting would be like the noise. That's the thing that you're doing. But that's not the objective. That's not the objective. And then you come to Malchus, which is to have a leiv basar. So. So Allah l'maisa, like we just do it, like we're doing, like it's good. Shachas Mincha Ma'ariv, Dav, and you're doing everything fine. We're all doing everything fine, but there are klal. Okay, correcting here and there. But there, you don't necessarily need big new avodas. It's always what I say. It's just a matter of being conscious of what the tachlis is, of realizing that Yiddishkeit can be seen as a way of fixing this imbalance between a zachar and a nekeva. So again, to sum it all up. We have a heart, whether we realize it or not. We have a heart. There's a Maisa. Just end with this. There's a Maisa. We're quoting Rav Tzaddik a lot in this series. There's a Maisa with Rav Tzaddik that he was before he became chassid from the Ishbitzer. So he was a guy in Olam. So he was traveling through Europe, whatever. So he eventually came to Ishbitzer. And to make a long story short, he came to Ishbitzer. He was in the back of the Beis Medrash, and he was known. He was the Kayin of Lublin, but there weren't billboards and things like that. No one knew what he looked like. So he's sitting in the back of the Beis Medrash. So the Ishbitzer, the Meshalech, tells his Gabe, go to the Beis Medrash, go to this row, go to that row, and tell him that the Rebbe knows that you're tzaddik of Lublin. So he goes to tzaddik and he says, the Rebbe said that I should tell you that he knows who you are, whatever. And he says, go back to the Rebbe, tell him I'm not impressed. Okay, fine. And it was like this throughout the whole weekend, that the Rebbe was telling him more things about himself. And he kept saying, I'm not, it doesn't make a difference to me. So until finally, it was by Shal, and the whole meals of Friday night, by the Tish and so on, he kept on the Ishbitzer trying to get our tzaddik to be engaged in the Tish. It was like wasn't interested. So until finally by Shal Shidduch, so the Rebbe was saying something, whatever, and then the lights were off, and at some point they heard screaming from the back of the Beis Medrash. Their tzaddik was like crying and screaming, And he said, the Rebbe is burning my heart. The Rebbe is burning my heart. And so and then it became silent. And the Rebbe began to cry. And he said, Rebbe, I don't have a heart. And so the Ishbitzer said, you have a heart. You just have to, you have to give a heart to your heart. As you say, you have to go heart to your heart. So everyone has a heart. Everyone has a heart. Nope. Sometimes it's covered with a leiv even. So there's two things that are working against us to experience the Aleph, and it's just to sum it all up. Two things working against us to experience the Aleph of Anochi. Number one, the heart is a leiv even sometimes. And again, the root of this is necessary in Galus, because you have to be a little bit stubborn. You got to be closed off. Otherwise, you become like every ism in the world becomes a part of you. You can't, you have to have a little bit closed off. It's true, but taken to an extreme, you become a leiv even. You become someone that doesn't think anything, no self-discovery, nothing. So that's one thing against us. Another thing against us is that we lack the language to articulate everything that our heart and neshama wants to say. We do lack that language. Our moon is small. That is true. Because I'll say, for example, that when Mashiach comes, we in Torah there's black letters, right, on white parchment. Because also when Mashiach comes, not only is there going to be black letters, but we're going to discover the white letters that are in the parchment, the white letters, because there's a lack of language right now. All of Torah Shebechsav can't communicate everything it's saying. It can't. So there's two things against us: the heart that's closed and the lack of communication. But that's our avodah, and that's what Golus Mitzrayim was. But we have the tools to be able to bring this together. We have the ability, first of all, again, like Ratzadik is saying, is to do everything we're doing in Yiddishkeit, all the Torah mitzvahs, but to do it with the kavanah, with the intention of having a good heart, having leiv basar. So you do that, then the stoniness of the heart is removed, and finally the neshama can communicate itself. And then it is true, there's a lack of the lack of articulation. We don't necessarily have a full language, but as we saw last time, despite the fact that we can't communicate everything the neshama says, whatever you can communicate can be seen as a concentrated essence of what you're feeling, of what you're experiencing, by saying words that have silence to them, by also what we spoke last time, by distilling, by getting to the kishkas of what you're feeling, not just the peripheral, but to get to the kishkas of what you're, like we're talking about Tu B'Shvat, right? You get to the kishkas of what you're feeling, then that can be given over. Then you can find the words to communicate that. You might not be able to find the words to communicate everything, but the essence, you can find words to communicate. And that when you put this together, that's what that's Dvar HaYetzim Mechel. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we do our avodah to say words that are true, to be honest. And like I said from the very beginning, the main avodah of all of this is when you say something to another yid, to mean it. You say good morning, you mean it. To say good afternoon, you mean it. To say I have kindness. So that's also true to meaning. You have to say words, to say things that resonate as true. And that itself, the Rebbeinu should help to repair all this, and we should be zeichet to get to that day where we can stand by our Sinai to hear the Aleph of Anochi. We'll be shneim our sagdoilim, kishachad b'leivachad b'yis kol tzedek, mihir v'yameinu. Amen.